Is 2021 the year that electric vehicle sales hit the inflection point on the adoption curve? That is the point at which they really begin to take off and sales on the curve straightens and goes more straight up like a hockey stick. I'm going to talk to Ram Chandrasekaran, who's the Wood Mackenzie's head of road transportation, about that. So welcome to the interview, Ram.
Hi, Markham. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, what's your take on this? We're going to have this year, you're forecasting 71 million total automobile sales, 6 million EVs, that's 8.5%. Are we now around the inflection point?
Absolutely. I think we are at an inflection point for EV sales globally. We're looking at the midway point through the year, we're already looking at about 2.5 million in EV sales. And if you look at the history of the last few years, the second half of the year has always been much stronger than the first half for EV sales, just based on how tax incentives are cashed. It just appears that second halves are always stronger, and that's what we expect to see this year as well.
Now, you point out that China and Europe each account for 2.5 million, or will this year, out of the 6. So clearly they're in the lead. The US will only be around 270,000 units. But we see that, EV sales seem to be picking up steam in the US. Do you expect to see those numbers rise over the next year or two?
Yes, we definitely, Wood Mackenzie projects that EV sales in the US will start to climb rapidly. However, it is unlikely to reach the 50% EV target that President Biden put across earlier in August by the year 2030.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were a little disappointed with the infrastructure bill that had EV financing credits that I guess were excluded and some other aspects of it. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, in his executive order early in August, President Biden put forward the goal to get to 50% EVs, and in a speech kind of commemorating that bill, or I'm sorry, the executive order, he said he's hoping to pass up to 12,500 in EV incentives. Now that is a big number. The breakdown of it was 7,500 for any EV and extending the caps on automakers, an additional 2,500 if the EV was made in the US, and a further 2,500 if it was made in a union plant. Honestly, that's a very solid proposal for an EV tax break that would have helped pretty much all consumers across the board. But that particular aspect of the incentive was kicked off the spending bill that was recently passed, and even the cap was not revised upward. So we're more or less back to square one in terms of EV incentives.
Now, I wonder if sales are going to be driven in the US more by market forces than anything. And there are a number of trends that I want to highlight here. One is the domestic automakers going all in on electric. Ford, Stellantis, and GM are switching to EV in a big way. A lot more models coming out, and I think, and we'll see some of the bigger ones like pickup trucks and SUVs, which are very popular in North America. Prices are dropping, ranges increasing, charging infrastructure is growing rapidly. Do all of those trends, Ram, not argue for sales picking up more rapidly in North America, even if incentives aren't as large as we had expected?
Absolutely, that's a great point. Wood Mackenzie does still project that the EV share in the United States is going to accelerate quite quickly, reaching close to 30% by 2030 and on to 80% by 2040 or mid-2040s. Now, the difference is that the target that was set by President Biden is 50% by 2030. So we're still significantly short, or expected to be short of that target. So the rate of acceleration, that's relative. Do we expect that to meet what China and Europe are doing? Absolutely not. But is it still going to be faster than most other parts of the world? Yes.
Is there a recognition, Ram, within the U.S. that the North America, but led by the United States, is in a serious competition with China, Europe, Japan, South Korea for leadership in the new industrial economy, of which electric vehicles, batteries are really at the forefront here.
Mm-hmm.
And that future prosperity 10, 20, 30 years down the road depends on being competitive more quickly than they currently are. Is there people, kind of get that argument?
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid argument. Both President Biden and Secretary Gronholm have repeatedly said that we're in an arms race for electric vehicles. And in support of that, they've also generated or provided a lot of funds for battery supply chain and research in batteries and battery supply chain. However, that that is yet to be reflected in the marketplace. Fact of the matter is, the United States at the moment is significantly behind both Europe and China in terms of both battery manufacturing and EV adoption. And when you talk about just battery manufacturing, I would go as far as to say we're behind Korea and Japan as well, and with no signs of catching up in the short term.
Now, you make the point that prices continue to be a pain point for consumers. And I remember an analysis I read 2 years ago based on 2018 data, where based on a levelized cost of driving, the cost per kilometer or cost per mile of an electric car was already lower than an internal combustion engine car. And the more you drove, the cheaper it got. And it seems like we're fixated on, what the sticker price is on the lot being competitive. Why aren't automakers? Why aren't they shifting to focus in their marketing on price per mile as opposed to price for the total price for the vehicle?
Right. That's a great question. Now, when you talk about price or when you talk about cost, there's a number of different aspects to it. The one that you're talking about is something we call total cost of ownership. So how much do you spend on owning your car over a 5-year or a 10-year period, however long you plan to keep it? And another really important milestone is something we call price parity at point of sale. So that is when you go to the dealership to buy the vehicle, what is the price difference between the EV and the ICE equivalent, right? Now, in a total cost of ownership, by and large, I think EVs have already taken over. As you said, back in 2018, they're talking about how EVs are already cheaper. In 2021, that is very much the case. So if you wanted to go buy a Tesla Model 3 and compare it to, let's say, a Toyota Camry over a 5 to 10-year period, the Tesla is going to be cheaper. I would venture as far as to say within that segment, we've already reached price parity at point of sale because a Tesla Model 3 is compared favorably with the BMW 3 Series as opposed to a Toyota Camry. So the Tesla is actually cheaper to buy. Ford F-150's latest announcement, the F-150 Lightning will put the pickup truck segment also at price parity at point of sale when it's launched in 2022, which is a huge step. In a sense, total cost of ownership is yesterday's news. I don't think the automakers need to hammer home that point at all because they're approaching price parity at point of sale for wider and wider segments. We're in very niche segments right now in the next couple of years, but it'll get much wider beyond that. Now, something to consider is that you could try to market total cost of ownership, but cost in itself as a primary primary reason for deciding the vehicle that you're buying, that is a very small segment of the car buying population. Now, if you think about how you went about buying your car, sure, you had a price in mind. You didn't want to spend over $40,000 or over $50,000, something like that. But then when you made your final decision, how much did that feature into your choice? where you're thinking about how nice the car looks, how good it feels, how do you enjoy driving it, and yes, to some extent, cost as well. So Wood Mackenzie projects that only about 10% of the consumer base uses cost of ownership as their primary reason for buying, and there's not a whole lot of reason to put marketing behind it.
Well, that's a very good point, Raman. Can we then infer from that that as the automakers roll out these new models, now we got SUVs, you get compact SUVs, we got all the things that actually consumers want to buy instead of small EVs, that will then appeal to how people actually, what they're looking for when they go to buy an automobile.
Absolutely. And I think the VW ID.4 is the perfect example of it. Now, when you look at, a Tesla, or a Mustang Mach-E, they're constantly compared against other EVs, right? So you talk about Model Y or Mustang Mach-E, that type of comparison. But when you look at the ID.4, what they're pitching it against is Honda CR-V or Toyota RAV4, right? With the introduction of that one particular product, we are shifting the conversation to from EV versus EV to I'm in the market for a small SUV or a compact SUV. Should I buy the most popular CR-V RAV4 or should I buy an ID.4? Right? So you're already seeing the expansion of segments and how that'll come into play with vehicle choices made by consumers. And with the model lineup that most OEMs have announced, we'll see that range of options will continue to expand.
Any final thoughts, Ram, on what we might see over the next couple of years, maybe 2 to 5 years, in the EV industry, particularly in North America?
Absolutely. There's a lot of fantastic models that are being launched. What I'm really focused on, however, as an analyst, I suppose, is the fact that I'm looking forward to seeing what the actual EPA regulations are going to look like, and that will really make a difference on what kind of EV models are launched and are available to the consumer.
When you say regulations, do you mean like the range, that sort of thing?
No, I mean the fuel economy, the fleet level CAFE regulations as laid out by the EPA.
Great, Ram. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights.
All right. Thank you, Markham.